Hi everyone, I'm Emma and I'm going to be talking to us today about camp cooking safety. So I'm just doing a debrief on everything you should be doing when camping with groups, camping independently, camping with families, everything that helps keep everybody safe. So first and foremost, basic fire safety. If you're cooking with fire, if you're cooking with fuel, you need to know stop, drop, and roll. So having stop, drop, and roll down pat, having children staying away from all cooking surfaces unless they're helping with an adult is very important. And just having a basic first aid kit. It's also super important to have a burn kit ready if you are working directly with cooking, especially if you're taking out a group. Camp setup is super important, so making sure that you separate your cooking area from your campsite and from your bathroom. This makes sure that you don't cross-contaminate, and this also helps just keep everything separate so you know where your group's going. It's also super important to separate your fuel refill station away from where you're cooking. You don't want fuel to be dripping in towards where you're going to have your fuel sources lit in your fires. So if you're using any liquid fuel or any fuel you're separately going to be pumping during your camping, it's really important that you have a spot that's at least like, say, 100 feet away from where you're going to be actually cooking with the fuel. That being said, fuel bottles should always be labeled. They should always be stored correctly. They should always have a tight cap on them, and everyone in your group should know where they are and where they're accessible in a bin that's also accessible. Area segmentation is important. So in cooking, sometimes you'll have a bunch of people at once. It's super important that everyone keeps the prep station, the cooking, and the cleanup/garbage area separate. This helps with cross-contamination. This helps with keeping things organized. You really want to be organized when working with food. So having that laid out, pre-set up is super important. Another pre-set up aspect is having equipment ready to handle hot pots, the water. You don't want to be cooking on a stove out in the wilderness, have some water boil over, and not have anything to grab the pot with safely other than your bare hands. So making sure all those things are set up at your station beforehand is super important. Also being able to move around your stove or your fire openly is good. You never want to sit down anywhere where boiling water can splash on you and you can't move. You don't want to be sitting and looking on top of a stove that's about to be lit. So keeping yourself back and like able to move around when working with any heat is super important. Basic food safety. So another aspect is basic food safety. Obviously, if you're working with a big group, not everyone's going to know all the principles of food safety, but as an instructor, as someone in charge of the cooking, you should be able to implement just like a few things to keep everyone safe. So A, boiling water is hot. Working with camp kids, they need to know that. Working with anything fire related, people need to know that they need to have some other sort of utensil to work with that. Cleaning utensils and cleaning equipment between raw foods. Raw foods can also just be like raw vegetables mixed with like an uncooked or cooked product, but mostly it obtains to meats. So making sure different meats, if you're working with raw meat, that it is all cut with separate surfaces, sanitized in between, and there's no cross-contamination between any of those things when cooking, so that's part of your setup. Also just storing things separately. So frozen foods, if you do manage to bring those on a trip, which I'm thinking is a little unlikely, those should be stored separately from foods that are pre-cooked. And you should always have uncooked foods, raw foods, separately stored from cooked and prepared foods. That being said, when you're on trips, a lot of the time it is safer to maintain dry and dehydrated foods. Moisture is a big indicator that something can get moldy or go bad on trip. Washing dishes afterwards, let's make sure we wash dishes that it is always a 3-bin method, and if it's not a 3-bin method, that you're just cleaning your own personal utensils. Using food utensils between many people allows for germ transfer a lot easier than you just cleaning your own equipment that you're using by yourself. So if you're with a big group, it's super important that you have hot water for washing, soap, you have a bin for rinsing, you have sanitizer. That being said, when you're distributing the water after you wash dishes, gray water should always be stored away from the campsite, and you never want to let bits of food and things be dumped into nature after washing, because that will also bring in animals, and that's another safety hazard amongst itself. So making sure you have something in place for that is really important. General safety tips just to follow up with before we end this. Always check your equipment's working, especially before lighting up fuel or, putting something hot in it. Have items ready, be prepared, be organized when working with food. Keep your face away while lighting stoves. Keep your hands away from things like fire. Don't ever leave something that has fuel turned on unattended. Allow liquid fuel if you're using like a whisper light stove. to burn off a little bit before adding more fuel when you're starting it. You always want to start with a small amount, let it burn off and combust, and then add more. And ladies or men, keep your hair tied back when you're working around any fire source. And always, 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 always have public sanitation available. So, for example, you just have like sanitization bottles around for everyone to use. If you're with children, remind them to be washing their hands before and after eating. And especially as the cook, make sure that between food handling, you are always sanitizing both the dishes and yourself. So yeah, Dinnerware is super awesome, and happy cooking.